Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to focus a little bit on the security issues that Chair Cantwell brought up that resulted in the big breaches. So things as simple as failure to install a software patch or failure to encrypt user information. We know the Equifax breach was possible because the company failed to apply a patch. And the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attackers infiltrated a virtual private network account that didn't use multi-factor authentication or authentication, which is a basic cybersecurity tool. Dr. Felton, in light of that reality, how should we be thinking about best incentivizing companies to do what should frankly be common sense cybersecurity practices?
Well, I think there is by now a well-established list of basic practices, including the ones you mentioned, and I suggest a longer list in my written testimony. But in my view, a rulemaking might require companies to follow those basic practices, in addition to the process and accountability, internal control considerations that will help to protect against more sophisticated attackers and more subtle errors. These baseline practices, I think, ought to be required.
Ms. Tamarello, you talked in your testimony about the fact that small businesses don't have the same resources to ensure compliance with data security requirements. And frankly, if we don't expect a major company like Colonial Pipeline to take the basic steps on data security, do you think it is unfair to expect a company with perhaps only a few staff or no in-house IT expertise to succeed where large and well-resourced companies have failed? That's rhetorical. Let me just ask specifically, how do you think Congress can ensure that smaller businesses engage in appropriate data security practices, and how should small business, the carrots and sticks for small businesses be different than those of large businesses that are well-resourced?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think, first and foremost, the vast majority of startups want to do the right thing, and currently they're stuck trying to figure out what exactly the right thing is. And so clear, consistent guidelines, whether through an FTC rulemaking or elsewhere, just saying, here is the menu of options that count as responsible security practices, and if you do these, we know that we can't prevent 100% of cyber attacks, but this is what responsible behavior looks like, and this is what you should model after. I think that would be a huge step up for startups that want to do the right thing, but again, just don't know what it is. And I would hope that any kind of menu of options provided by, for instance, an FTC rulemaking would account for scale and size and resources. Some of the things you mentioned in your first question are low-hanging fruit, and a startup can easily do them. It's just needing to know that that's enough. And so I think there's a way to create a framework that allows flexibility but still provides startups with the certainty they need.
Yeah. Well, speaking of resources, I think there's an agreement that the Federal Trade Commission does not have sufficient resources and staff today to handle the issues related to data security and data breaches. I wonder if you can, Dr. Felton and Ms. Rich, talk about what kind of additional needs the agency has if Congress were to expand its authority on data security.
So in terms of staffing of technologists, I think the agency is on the order of 10 professional technologists who are working in the mission side of the agency right now. And I think with resources, the FTC could reasonably use 50 to 60 people in those roles.
In addition to help attract technologists, there have actually been a few serious problems that have been identified by former technologists at the agency other than Ed. One is there's no career path, as Ed talked about, but another is that there are odd, very rigid and outdated ethics rules governing what technologists can do when they leave the FTC that end up meaning that if they ever worked on a case involving Google, they can never work on any other case involving Google. So it's a big disincentive, and some articles have been written about it. In terms of what the FTC needs, it's not just money, it's authority. I worked for years with Section 5, trying to bring privacy and data security cases, and they're really tough because there's so many gaps. Section 5 doesn't even allow you to prescribe practices. It only allows you to get an order against a company that already engaged in negligent practices. And it doesn't cover certain entities, and we talked about the civil penalties, et cetera. So there just needs to be a law that allows the FTC to hang its hat on it and hold companies accountable.
And I agree with the point about overly rigid conflict of interest rules.
Thank you.